Hello, everyone, and welcome back again to the Oakville Festivals of Film and Art podcast. My name is Ian Tyson. I was the gala host this year at the festival, as well as hosted the awards, and it was absolutely my pleasure to be the host the night that we premiered this film at the gala. It is my joy and pleasure to introduce you to the writer and director of Tehranto, Faran Moradi.
Hi, how's it
Faran,
going?
how are you doing, my friend?
Good. How are you? It's
I'm
good to be
good. It's really good to see you again. Haven't seen you since the night we premiered the film, it's just an incredible and lovely love story and cultural story. For those who maybe haven't seen the film, maybe if you want, I don't want to read off, IMDb or anything. So why don't straight from the horse's mouth, as it was, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of the film?
Yeah, for sure. So Tehranto takes place in Toronto, where love and family paints a scene of vibrant colors and intricate textiles in a lively Iranian Canadian community, where Batty and Sharon, two young students from within the divided community, accidentally fall in love. And I say accidentally because at first they don't like each other. One of them is newly arrived from Iran, and he is like staunchly anti-assimilation, and the other one is born and raised here, and she is staunchly pro-assimilation.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting thing that you establish right off the hop in the movie in sort of that prologue sequence, which I want to talk about a little more in a minute. But for those who maybe don't understand culturally, maybe explain that divide culturally from the pre and post revolutionary time in Iran.
Yeah, of course. So for those who don't know, Iran went through a revolution in 1979, and for those trying to leave the country before that point, it was much easier. Iran had diplomatic relations with a lot of countries, so a lot of them were able to kind of come here with the whatever wealth that they would have had in Iran. They were mostly able to transfer that same wealth outside the country. So if you were middle class in Iran and you left Iran at the same time, you're probably leaving middle class. Whereas after the revolution, not only was there more economic hardship for a lot of people, but then they had to, I guess, take, for a lot of people, steps down. So economically, a lot of them were at a little bit more of a disadvantage when they left after the revolution versus those who left before. So as a result, you kind of get almost like this weird economic divide between a lot of them. But within that too, there's sometimes what will happen within different immigrant communities. And this isn't unique to Iranians, this part, but sometimes when certain groups of individuals come and assimilate much earlier than others, they end up developing this weird like superiority complex to those who come more recently. And so that's also something that we try to touch on a little bit in the film.
Yeah, it's definitely a through line, and plays into the narrative of the almost the, I guess, Romeo and Juliet-esque from two different communities battle that sort of happens on a social standpoint. But just to that prologue again, where you in a really sort of light but also informative way in the opening of the film explain this divide.
Yeah.
There's some mixed media in there, which I really enjoyed. Can you talk a little bit about the media you used for this flashing back and the different things that you used? Because it was just incredibly clever.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, for us, I guess the way that we did that prologue was the things that take place in Iran are shot on Super 8. And it's also largely because Batty's parents are quite a bit older than Sharon's parents. So Batty's the male protagonist, and Sharon is the female protagonist. So Batty's parents, they're quite a bit older, and so Super 8 would have been the kind of medium of choice. And once, by the time VHS came out, it was kind of after the revolution, so it made things technology harder to get and more expensive and stuff. So a lot of people might have just stuck with Super 8 for the first little while. So Batty's montage is all Super 8, and then Sharon's stuff, because it's, it's in the West and it's a little bit later because her family's much younger. All of that's on VHS. So quickly, as you're watching the movie, you don't have to go like put little like icons on the screen that say where you are, just by the mere fact of seeing, okay, this is Super 8 film. This is clearly Iran. Okay, this is VHS. This is clearly Canada. And then we kind of harken back to it a little bit in a modern montage, with a modern equivalent of that being cell phone footage. And so we have like a cell phone footage montage later in the film when they start dating.
Yeah, as I said, it's just such a clever little device in the storytelling to
Mm.
just this unconscious cue that people get. And it's funny how we don't think about that with
Mhm.
technology, that you can just automatically identify, oh yeah, that's probably from like the late 70s, early 80s. Oh, this is getting a little later. And
Right,
then you just, the way it kind of comes in, it's just a really, really interesting device. Now, I guess my question is, what was the origin? I mean, obviously you're part of the community, but what was the origin of this particular story for you in the writing of the film?
yeah. So as I was meeting more and more Iranians within Toronto, because I kind of grew up like Toronto adjacent. I was born and raised in Coburg, then moved quite a ways away to Leamington, Ontario, over by Point Pelee, then London, then Oakville. So once I moved to Oakville and I was interacting more and more with Iranians in Toronto, I was learning that a lot of Iranians don't watch a lot of Iranian cinema.
Hmm.
And when I asked why, a very common thing that would come up from different people who don't even know each other is a lot of them were like, well, we have hard lives. Why would we spend our time watching movies that just depict Iranians with hard lives? And I thought that that was valid. And I don't think that's to say that there isn't value in that. There totally is. But I think that there needs to be a variety of genres and styles that represent different aspects of our community, the same way that there are different genres and styles that reflect on Western society or Canadian culture or American culture, right? So I noticed a gap there, and there was like a need and a want for something like this, and so I broke off from my usual style, which was the more stress-inducing drama, and I
Right.
decided I'd do something that is packaged like a rom-com, but about halfway through the movie, you realize that it's really a coming-of-age film for two different individuals.
Most definitely. And did you pull then character ideas and notions from people in your life or within the community that you were seeing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole variety of different kinds of people that you'll see in the movie. There's, um, yeah, like I mean, oftentimes in movies, the if you do see an Iranian, they're like a cab driver or an Uber driver, or they own a pizza store or something like that, and that's pretty much it. Our film does have a cab driver who's
Yes.
Iranian or an Uber driver, right? But then we also have like a real estate agent and a doctor and like one guy does deliver pizzas, but another person is like she's retired. One other person um is like a city councilor, a politician. So you have all these different kinds of individuals within the Iranian community that do different jobs, and this is pulling from different people that I've met, different people that I know about, that I've read about, that I've seen, people in my own family. In fact, Batty's dad is actually played by my father,
Yes,
and
that's
the
right.
characterization of that character is very much so based on my father.
So for him, you just said, "Dad, just deliver these like it's you. Deliver the
Exactly,
lines like
exactly.
it's
And
you."
I
Yeah.
remember his first take for one of the scenes. He was very like sweet and gentle and kind. And my dad is like a sweet and gentle and kind man. But sometimes as a parent, you have to be a little more stern. And so I was like, no, this is a like scene where the son is really screwing up. So you need to be more stern with him. Talk to me like if I was the one screwing up. And then he nailed it.
Did he channel something in particular from your history there,
I'm sure
Faran?
you would have. You'd have to ask him. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Um,
So you didn't cite a particular moment. Hey, Dad,
no,
remember
no,
that
no, no. I was
time?
just like, imagine.
Remember that time?
No, I was just like, imagine this is me. I'm screwing up here, blah, blah, blah. And then he nailed it. And funny enough, a lot of the Super 8 footage at the beginning of the movie is actually footage of my dad filmed on Super 8 that I kind
Oh,
of
wow.
script around so that I could use a lot of this old family archival footage.
So was there a mix then of stuff that was actual archival footage and then things that you just recreated to look that way?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Just seamless. Could not tell at
Oh,
all.
that's great. Well, we shot a lot of it on like the same types of cameras and stuff. So
Where the heck did you find a Super 8 in 2022?
I have a collection of them.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
used to
yeah.
have one. I loved those things. It was great.
Oh, they're so great. I've loaned mine out to another filmmaker who's out exploring Europe, but once they're back, you're next up to borrow.
That's fantastic. I wanted to, when I went to Europe when I was like 20, I wanted to bring the Super 8
Oh,
with me.
it's
I
so
loved
great.
it. It was great. But yeah, it's now I didn't understand, I guess, obviously not being right ingrained or a part of that community, and especially geographically within Toronto, the actual geographic divide of the
Mhm.
pre and post revolutionaries. That's like sort of the Richmond Hill versus the more in the city proper.
A little bit. The thing is, like, I feel like if you can, even if you come, because the revolution was what, like 40 years ago now. Like if you're, even if you came after the revolution, but you came like 40 years ago, like you've probably had some time to acquire some wealth, and you could probably, afford to live up there. Or there's some people who they're newly graduated, they are doing really well, they go up there. I know like Sammy, who plays actually, you know what, not just Sammy, I'm not going to single him out. I would say like a good half, if not more, of our cast live out in like Richmond Hill or North York or upwards of Midtown, in like homes and stuff with their families, or with their partners or whatever. And I don't think that's to say that these people are like super wealthy and disconnected or whatever, the way that they are in the movie, right? Obviously in the movie things are characterized a little bit, but
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, that's definitely been changing. um but like even in the movie though, like you compare Fred, who's this like super assimilated, like wealthy guy, to his sister, right? His sister also left before the revolution, right? But you compare the two of them and the way that they live their lives and the way that they act, and they're like polar opposites, right?
Right.
So this whole like divide thing is, it's a neat hook to pull people in, and then as they're
Sure.
watching, you notice like, okay,
Well,
they're
and that was the thing. I was just curious, not being familiar
Mhm.
with the community, whether how, obviously, yes, exaggerated version within a
Yeah.
film, and it does serve a narrative purpose, which is great.
Mhm.
Um, I guess speaking of narrative purposes and just the flow of the story, the romance, the budding romance that seems unlikely at the beginning, and sort of the highs and lows that they go through as a couple.
Mhm.
There were some very real moments in a lot of that, and I think we talked on the night of the gala. I mean, the body sort of awkwardly asking for the first date on the phone, and
Yeah.
I was getting sweaty armpits watching that scene because it was reminding me, how much were you drawing personally from some of that stuff?
Oh, either like from my own life or from friends' lives, like, because especially when you have those friends in the room there on both sides, her friends are there and his friends are there. Like I've even like been a witness to things like that, right? So I think
Sure.
it's a common thing with a lot of friends groups, that um, a lot of people like to share and like to get their friends involved. So Batty is constantly going back to his friends, and his friends are almost like his therapists, right? And like
Yeah.
me and my group of friends, we're constantly like opening up and sharing with each other about like things going on in our lives, which is, I think, also a more common thing, because I know that among a lot of West Asian men, they don't like to talk about feelings and emotions and like things happening in their private lives. And Batty does it to like a surface degree, right? But it isn't until he has this conversation with his mom later that he really opens up, and he realizes how much he's been bottling up.
Right. Yeah,
You
he's
know?
always got that. There's something under the surface you can always see that he isn't letting out. But I did love that portrayal of that tight friend group. Like you said, they were therapists, they were
Yeah,
cheerleaders, they were coaches, and
yeah,
just the way they were, what'd she say? And, those conversations were,
yeah,
those again felt very real to, friend group things, and seeing both sides was really, really something, and very well
yeah,
done.
yeah. And I thank you very much for saying that. And I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just like these two guys being like, "Oh, you got this, man," because sometimes it's not like, sometimes you have a friend who's like, "No, you're an idiot." You know what I mean? And it's nice to get these different opinions in those conversations. So
Yeah, I love that there's always that one friend, "Did you said that? Come on." And, just freaking out that you actually were that vulnerable or whatever with a potential partner. It was really well done, and it served there's such a great balance of, there's obviously the romance, but there's also the
Mhm.
dramatic, and there's some really great comedic elements within the film, which some of those, especially the interactions with Body's friend group, were the source of a lot of the humor, which was great. Speaking of which, and I know I asked you about this at the gala, but I loved it. Where did the idea come from? A, to use the voiceover narrator, and B, that for some reason one of the characters could hear the narrator.
Yeah,
What was the impetus of all of that?
I've always kind of liked this idea of, well, actually, I'll answer your first question first about the narrator. Um, with the narrator, there's a lot of movies that I was watching that kind of influenced the ideas within the story, and one of them was Amelie, and another one was 500 Days of Summer. Both of those movies also break the fourth wall at different times, but it's not like a running trope. And some of those moments in the film for me are my favorite moments in those movies, because it happens and you're like, wait, did that just happen?
Yep,
Um,
exactly my thought, because
yeah,
we'd gone along. I don't even know where we are in the runtime before you realize that wait, what just
yeah, yeah.
did
I
you
think
just
it's like
interact with the narrator? What
I,
just happened?
I think the first time is something like 25-30 minutes, and then it happens a bunch of time afterwards. Um, and for me, it's yeah, just thinking back to my fascination with the fourth wall thing. Like you go back to there were these um these books that my sister had that were kind of these like spoof storytelling books, and sometimes the characters in those books would respond to the narration text. Or I think in one of the Robert Munch books, like
Right.
one of the characters like responds. And in Toy Story, like if you think about it, the toys are almost breaking the fourth wall, right? And I've always liked this idea because I just think it's so out there and it's so wild and it's unexpected that it's a nice way to tie in the story to the real world, because it's a character who's like kind of jumping back and forth between the two.
Yeah, he kind of becomes a weird connection for the audience
Hmm.
with the narrator, and he's also very much a la, I guess, Brad Pitt in Ocean's 11. He's
Yeah,
always
yeah,
eating.
always eating, always eating. And there's one scene where he runs out of food, and the narrator throws him some more food.
Yes, which that again, that was fantastic. And again, I went, wait, did the narrator just give him food? What is
Yeah,
happening?
yeah.
But it was in such a great way, and it added a lightness to the narrative, which was really cool. And I dug that. Now, what was the timeline in putting the film together? Like when you decided to write and create the film, and then how? And I guess secondly to that, how much did COVID play a role in the
Right.
filming?
So I the initial idea I had in like end of 2017, wrote it in 2018, got the funding end of 2018. 2019 we filmed it, and then I started cutting it. We were done cutting it and like had everything kind of ready to go to music and sound and everything by uh spring of 2020.
Okay.
The pandemic hit.
Yep.
So spring of 2020, the pandemic hits, and now we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we do this now with everything that's going on in the world? And actually, the film that we got developed, like the film was sitting on my desk for a while because that was going to be something that was going to be cut a little later on in the process. Like we were going to push some things along and then do that later. Um, but getting that developed was tough because the pandemic had just started. So we had to like ship it to New York, and they were under lockdown, and they like were exchanging it between different labs and stuff, and then getting the footage back to us. So the whole pandemic made everything so much longer. And so by the time that we were finished the film, we were in like end of 2021. So our post-production process took like a year, if not a little bit more, because of the pandemic. And we're,
Sure.
indie filmmakers, and you're trying to figure out new ways to do things. And yeah, so that was tough. And so
Did
by
you
the time it came out, it was what, like 2 years after we filmed it.
Wow. Did you have to reshoot or do any pickups during the pandemic?
No reshoots, but there were a couple pickups that we needed. There's at the beginning of the film, in the montage that you're talking about, there's a section where you see Sharon as a little girl, and two of those shots of Sharon as a little girl are isolated from the rest of the family. And so those ones we had to shoot during the pandemic. And so what I did was we did the casting kind of virtually. We got someone. I was basically directing this little girl's mom. She was holding an iPad
Wow.
uh, on a Skype call with me while I was screen recording the Skype call. And then, so I would direct her where to put the camera, how to move it, all this stuff. And we had like picked outfits and a spot in her home and all this stuff. And then I would direct the little girl through the Skype call while I was screen recording. Then I took that Skype video that I screen recorded, cropped myself out, put it onto a USB stick, plugged it into a really old PlayStation, connected that to a VCR, hit record on the VCR so that I could get it back onto the VHS tape, and then connected the VCR back to my computer where I could recapture it on tape. So it was
Wow.
like a whole process. That's what I mean is like the pandemic made it so we had to figure out how to do all these new things, which I'm sure like some people have been doing, but as indie filmmakers, we don't have these resources. So we have to be
Sure.
more like figure things out. Or there's one scene where Batty's biking through the snow and we were going to shoot it, but then the pandemic happened. So we were like, shoot, we need this shot of this pickup of Batty biking through the snow. So we took a shot of him resetting between takes when there wasn't snow. With VFX, we like cut him out, went back and got footage of the location with the snow when it was just like me and one other person, put those on top of each other in VFX, got someone to paint more snow on top, and so we fabricated this entire scene with
Jeez.
VFX. Yeah.
And I would not have known that unless you had said anything. That's
Oh,
amazing.
that's really great to hear.
Well, it is something how like that level of creativity that you've got to bring. In my professional life as a speaker, one of the things I always talk about is the gold that can be mined in working within confines.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had those confines of the pandemic. And I mean, yeah, USB stick to PlayStation to VHS back to digital. It's amazing. It's just such an incredible story of just finding that creativity
Yeah.
and like just we've got to find a way to do this. And I will say, because you mentioned the snow, and I remember it was one of my notes that we didn't get to talk about
Oh
on
yeah.
the gala night, but the often in film when there's winter being depicted, it's very clean, I
Mhm.
guess you would say, and just kind of it's moving because maybe a lot of the time they're not actually shooting it in the winter and it's fake snow, but
Yeah.
I felt cold in the theater during the winter scenes
Oh, that's
and
so good.
legitimately thought, yeah, that looks like a Canadian winter. There's
Yeah.
no cleaning up of the streets or anything else. Not everything's properly shoveled.
Yeah.
There's some snert, some snow on dirt in there, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
felt real.
And I remember we had conversations about that. We're like, well, that still kind of looks ugly. We're like, whatever, all snow looks ugly. Like it's not,
Yeah.
you know
It
what I
it
mean?
looks like a Toronto winter is what it looks like. So it was very
Yeah.
authentic.
Well, that's great to hear. Thank you.
Well, no, and I legitimately, it was very hot the weekend we had the festival, and
Oh yeah.
we're all sitting in air conditioning, but I got chilly that
Oh wow.
watching that. Like it just maybe I'm like, oh geez, I don't want winter back, and I started squirming around in my seat.
Oh man.
Talk to me for a minute if you can about the assembling of the cast. I know, as you mentioned, with your father playing Body's father, there's some family connections in there, but talk to me about the casting and your thought process in choosing these different characters.
Yeah. So growing up watching a lot of Iranian characters in TV and movies, they're never played by Iranians, right? Like you've got like Jake Gyllenhaal, Ben Kingsley,
Right.
Alfred Molina, like they're all playing Iranians. And then when you have Iranian actors, they're not playing Iranians. You know what I mean? So it was important to try to have that authentic cast, especially because this has always been a criticism for a lot of Iranians, right? So we made sure to do pretty extensive casting with lots of auditions, lots of tapes, some chemistry reads, and part of that was we went to ACTRA, the filmmaking union for actors, and we were like, "Hey, listen, you guys don't have enough Iranian actors in your roster. Outside of the union, there aren't enough Iranian actors, but maybe if we do a little bit of union and non-union, we can find them." And at the time, you weren't allowed to mix union and non-union for indie productions. So they were gracious enough to work with us, and they gave us some leeway to do that. And so we were able to, find people in the Iranian film scene, for example. So they weren't screen actors. There were some that had been actors for years and then they retired and they didn't want to do it anymore. There were some who had, like one of our main actors, Mose Rami, who plays Sharon. She's one of the leads in the film, and she came straight out of theater school, so she hadn't even had an opportunity to join ACTRA.
Right.
And because of this, actors numbers also grew, so they were also able to invite more actors into their union, which is good because now it means that for the next production that needs a lot of Iranians, there's an actual roster there. And even like for my father, for example, a lot of people have said like, oh, like he was so great, blah blah blah. I mean, he had acted in Iran in some theater plays and things like that, some community plays. It had been a long time for him, but it wasn't like he was completely new to it either. It was all of our actors had some kind of experience, except for, I think, the only one that might have never had any experience was, aside from like the little kids, the Uber driver. He's the
Right.
only one who was like had no acting experience at all.
But there was a connection there too, because
Yeah,
he's the husband of one of the other actors, correct?
yeah. He's the husband of one of the actors, and that other actor is my cousin.
Right.
So
So again,
my
there's
cousin's
6
husband,
degrees of separation with
yeah,
all of it.
yeah, my cousin's husband played the Uber actor or the Uber character.
Well, I mean, you assembled a really wonderful cast that seemed to work really well, and you talked about the chemistry reads
Mhm.
with, in particular, Body and Sharon. There's such a range in terms of that chemistry. Like they go from straight up bristly
Mhm.
to then being in love, and then things get bristly again. It's what? So how do you read for that?
Like with the actors?
Yeah, like where you want them to have that romantic chemistry, but then you also need to have this like ice cold chemistry at the
Yeah.
beginning.
So we ended up doing, for the chemistry read, we did 2 scenes, I think. The first
Okay,
one was the first time that they meet in the cafe.
right,
And because in that scene, you need to make sure that the bristling chemistry is there, but you also need to make sure that there's a little bit of charm in there.
sure,
And so that was, I guess, looking for that subtlety, because we know, like, okay, if that little bit of charm is there, and they're nailing their private auditions as well, which involve some of their other scenes, then we know that they can do some more of the romance stuff. And then we also did a scene, the scene where they have their argument in the cafe.
mm,
That scene's important because it shows how they can hit the height of like an argument, but then they can also get very vulnerable and like be sensitive and loving towards each other, which was also really important to us.
well, it was absolutely nailed, and I think I mentioned to Sammy on the night of the premiere as well, the work he's doing with his eyes and his mouth in
Mhm.
this role. There was just little things like just even like licking his lips or
Yeah.
pursing his lips before something, and then just the vulnerability that he was showing in his eyes through this whole portrayal
Mhm.
really brought it all, like brought me in anyway
Oh,
to
that's
the.
so great. And when you meet him, he's like not at all like Batty's character, which you wouldn't expect because you watch Batty's character and you're like, oh, this is like an authentic person. But then
Sure.
and he's like bumbly and sweet and like kind of funny and gentle and whatever. But then you meet him in real life and he's much more like he speaks completely differently. Like his
Yes,
mannerisms and his speech is different, and he's way more laid back. He's chill. He's like, "Hey, yo, what's up, man?" Blah, blah. Like he's like more like that, you know. And then
absolutely.
there's Batty, and he's like bumbling. He's like, "Hey guys, how's it going?" Blah, blah. Like he's much more.
Sort
Um,
of subdued, yeah.
yeah.
Well, and that was one of my favorite fun moments when we did the panel and had the cast up there on the premiere night, was asking Sammy about that first phone call, asking her out and how real that felt. And I said, "Did you draw from personal experience to him?" And I believe he said, "Yeah, I never really had that problem,"
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
which was
No,
fantastic. But
he's like very cool and slick and
yeah, yeah, which
not at all like that.
Body definitely is not. But so tell me, or tell the people that are listening and watching, how can they access or see this wonderful film?
So the film is doing the festival circuit right now. The next festival up is the CineQuest Physical Festival in San Jose. So that'll be on August the 17th at 7 p.m. local time and August the 19th at 4 p.m. local time. Beyond that, we're still waiting to hear back from a few more festivals in Canada and the States. And then the movie will be having its theatrical release in November. The exact date, I don't think we've announced yet, but there will be a trailer and a poster and full on marketing and everything at some point in late September. We'll be launching
Awesome.
all of that. So keep your eyes peeled and find us on Instagram.
Excellent. And what's the Instagram handle for them to follow?
It's Tehranto Film on Instagram, and you can also find me if you're having trouble finding it, and shoot me a DM. My Instagram is Faran Media on Instagram.
That's amazing. Well, I wanted people to be able to reach out and be in touch with you and follow your work, because I know I, for one, can't wait to see what you do next with
Thank
all
you.
of this. But Faran, I just wanted to thank you so much for making the time today to chat with me again. It's a pleasure to talk with you as
Likewise.
always. And just again, such a delightful film. I hope everybody will keep their eyes out in November to be able to go and support this great Canadian film and see it in theaters and support a great Canadian filmmaker. And I thank you so much again.
Thank you so much.
Take care.